In the late 19th century, amidst the rugged landscapes of the American West, a band of bounty hunters pursued a notorious outlaw named Silas Black. Unbeknownst to them, Silas was no ordinary man. He was a vampire, hiding his true nature behind the guise of a ruthless gunslinger. For years, Silas had roamed the frontier, his thirst for blood masked by his brutal reputation. The bounty hunters, led by a determined man named Jacob Langley, had been hired by a cabal of shadowy financial tycoons. These tycoons, unbeknownst to the public, were themselves vampires of European descent who had crossed the Atlantic to exploit the New World's wealth. They saw Silas as a threat to their dominance and sought to eliminate him. One fateful night, in a remote canyon under a blood-red moon, the bounty hunters finally cornered Silas. A fierce shootout ensued, echoing through the canyon walls. Silas fought valiantly, his supernatural strength and speed making him a formidable opponent. However, the bounty hunters were well prepared, armed with silver bullets and wooden stakes. Despite his best efforts, Silas was outnumbered and overwhelmed. With a final, desperate lunge, he took down several of his assailants before Jacob Langley himself drove a stake through Silas's heart. As dawn broke, Silas's lifeless body lay sprawled on the canyon floor. The bounty hunters, blooded and weary, believed their grim task was complete. They buried Silas in an unmarked grave and rode back to collect their reward, convinced that the threat had been vanquished. But Silas Black was no ordinary vampire. As the first rays of the morning sun touched his grave, something extraordinary happened. Instead of being reduced to ash, Silas's body began to regenerate. The curse of his vampirism was transformed by the land itself, infusing him with a new, unprecedented power. By noon, Silas clawed his way out of the grave, reborn as the first American vampire of his kind. He stood in the sunlight, feeling its warmth for the first time in centuries, and realized he was no longer bound by the weaknesses that plagued his European brethren. With his newfound invulnerability, Silas's thoughts turned to revenge. He vowed to hunt down the bounty hunters who had betrayed him and the European vampires who had orchestrated his downfall. Silas's rage was a fire that burned hotter than the sun, and he would stop at nothing to exact his vengeance. In the weeks that followed, whispers of a vengeful spirit spread across the frontier. Jacob Langley and his surviving men found themselves hunted by an unseen predator. One by one, they met grisly fates, their bodies drained of blood and left as warnings to the others. Fear gripped the hearts of the bounty hunters, but none was more terrified than Jacob himself. He knew that Silas was coming for him, and there was nowhere to hide. Meanwhile, in the opulent parlors of New York City, the European vampire tycoons gathered in secret. Their once uncheckable confidence was now marred by unease. The emergence of a vampire who could walk in daylight threatened the delicate balance of power they had maintained for centuries. They plotted and schemed, seeking ways to contain this new menace, but Silas was always one step ahead. As the bodies piled up and the fear spread, Silas Black became a legend, a ghost story told around campfires. Yet, his ultimate goal was not just revenge, but to dismantle the old order of vampires who had controlled the world for so long. He would become a symbol of a new era, an unstoppable force against those who had believed themselves invincible. And so, the stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the foundations of the vampire world. Silas Black, the invulnerable American vampire, moved through the shadows, his every step bringing him closer to his enemies. The final reckoning was coming, and no one, living or undead, would escape his wrath. The months following Silas Black's resurrection were marked by a growing dread that spread across the American frontier and into the bustling cities of the East Coast. Silas's hunt for his enemies was relentless, a campaign of terror that left a trail of death and whispers of a new kind of vampire. His first target was the bounty hunters who had taken his life. Jacob Langley, the leader of the bounty hunters, had gone into hiding in a small, remote town called Dusty Creek. He was a man marked by fear, his once steely resolve shattered by the realization that Silas had returned from the grave. He spent his days jumping at shadows and his nights plagued by nightmares of Silas's eyes, glowing with vengeance. Silas tracked Jacob with an unerring instinct, his supernatural senses attuned to the man's fear. One night, under a crescent moon, Silas arrived in Dusty Creek. The town was quiet, its inhabitants unaware of the dark force that had come among them. Silas moved through the streets like a wraith, his presence unnoticed until it was too late. Jacob's hideout was a dilapidated cabin on the outskirts of town. Silas approached it silently, his movements as fluid as the wind. He found Jacob inside, clutching a silver crucifix, his eyes wide with terror. Before Jacob could react, Silas was upon him, his hand of ice around the man's throat. "You should have left me to the wolves, Jacob," Silas hissed, his voice a chilling whisper. "Now, you'll reap what you've sown." Jacob's screams echoed through the night, but no one came to his aid. When Silas was done, he left the man's lifeless body as a message to those who had wronged him. Silas Black had returned, and he would not be stopped. News of Jacob's gruesome death reached the ears of the remaining bounty hunters, spreading panic among them. They scattered to the far corners of the country, hoping to evade Silas's wrath, but there was no escape. One by one, Silas hunted them down, each death more brutal than the last. His reputation as the invincible vampire grew, becoming the stuff of nightmares. As Silas continued his quest for revenge, he also sought to understand the true nature of his transformation. He discovered that his new powers were tied to the land itself, an ancient and powerful magic that had awakened within him. This revelation only fueled his desire to dismantle the old order of vampires who had controlled the world for centuries. In New York City, the European vampire tycoons convened in a secret meeting. The room was dimly lit, the air thick with tension. These vampires, who had once seen America as a land ripe for exploitation, now saw it as a breeding ground for a new threat. Silas Black was unlike any vampire they had encountered, a wild, untamed force that could destroy them all. "We cannot allow this upstart to continue," declared Count Armand, a vampire of ancient lineage. "He threatens everything we have built." "But how do we stop him?" asked Baroness Isabella, her voice tinged with fear. "He walks in daylight and is impervious to our weapons. We are vulnerable. We must understand his origins," Armand replied. "There must be a way to exploit his connection to the land. We need information, and for that, we need someone who knows this new world intimately." They decided to enlist the help of an old ally, a vampire known as Elias Thorne, who had lived in America for centuries and had a deep understanding of its mystical secrets. Thorne was a recluse, residing in an ancient mansion hidden in the Appalachian Mountains. The European vampires sent a messenger to summon him, hoping that his knowledge could provide the key to defeating Silas. Meanwhile, Silas was not idle. He had begun to gather allies of his own, humans disillusioned with the corrupt tycoons and willing to fight against their vampire overlords. Among them was a woman named Lydia Caldwell, a sharpshooter with a vendetta against the vampires who had destroyed her family. Lydia had seen firsthand the horrors these creatures inflicted and found in Silas a kindred spirit. Together, Silas and Lydia began to strike at the heart of the vampires' power, targeting their financial interests and exposing their corruption. Each attack brought them closer to their ultimate goal, to confront the European vampires and dismantle their empire. As Silas's legend grew, so did the fear among his enemies. The European vampires, now desperate, awaited the arrival of Elias Thorne, hoping that he would bring them the knowledge they needed to destroy the first American vampire. Little did they know, Thorne had his own secrets and might not be the ally they expected. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine the future of the vampire world. Silas Black, the invulnerable American vampire, moved ever closer to his enemies, his heart burning with vengeance. The final reckoning was approaching, and no one, living or undead, could predict the outcome. The chilling winter winds swept through the Appalachian Mountains as the European vampires awaited the arrival of Elias Thorne. They gathered in a secluded mansion, hidden deep within the forest, their anxiety palpable. The ancient vampire finally appeared, his presence commanding and enigmatic. With eyes as dark as the deepest night, Thorne surveyed the anxious assembly. "Why have you summoned me?" Thorne's voice was deep and resonant, carrying the weight of centuries. "We are threatened by a new breed of vampire, Elias," Count Armand replied. "Silas Black is invulnerable to our traditional methods. He walks in daylight and defies our ancient powers. We need your knowledge to defeat him." Thorne listened intently, his expression unreadable. After a moment, he nodded. "I have heard of this Silas Black. His transformation is tied to the ancient magic of this land, a force older than any of us. To defeat him, we must understand this power and find a way to sever his connection to it." As Thorn spoke, Silas and Lydia Caldwell continued their campaign of disruption. They targeted the financial interests of the European vampires, exposing their corruption and inciting public outrage. Banks were robbed, documents revealing shady dealings were published, and influential figures were publicly denounced. Silas's growing network of human allies, united by a shared hatred of the vampires, executed these attacks with precision and fervor. In one daring raid, Silas and Lydia infiltrated the opulent mansion of Baroness Isabella. They moved like shadows, leaving a trail of chaos in their wake. As they made their escape, Silas left a message carved into the marble wall. "Your time is over." The European vampires were infuriated and terrified. Their once uncheckable control over the New World was crumbling, and Silas's defiance was a constant reminder of their vulnerability. Desperate to regain the upper hand, they intensified their efforts to uncover his weaknesses. Meanwhile, Thorn delved into the ancient lore of the land. He pored over forgotten texts and consulted with Native American shamans who understood the mystical forces at play. Thorn learned of a powerful artifact, the Heart of the Earth, said to control the very essence of the land's magic. If the artifact could be found and its power harnessed, it might provide a means to weaken Silas. Silas, however, was not unaware of these developments. He had spies among the European vampires, and he learned of their quest for the Heart of the Earth. Realizing the danger, Silas decided to find the artifact himself. With Lydia by his side, he embarked on a journey deep into the heart of the Appalachian wilderness, determined to secure the artifact and prevent it from falling into the hands of his enemies. Their journey was fraught with peril. The mountains were treacherous, and the winter chill bit into their flesh. But Silas's determination was unyielding, and Lydia's sharpshooting skills proved invaluable against the dangers they faced. As they ventured deeper into the wilderness, they encountered signs of the artifact's presence, strange symbols carved into trees, ancient stone markers, and whispers on the wind. Back in New York City, Thorn's search for the artifact took on a greater urgency. He deciphered clues that led him to believe the artifact was hidden in a sacred cave, protected by powerful wards. The European vampires, growing impatient, demanded results, their desperation making them increasingly volatile. As Silas and Lydia closed in on the cave, they encountered an unexpected ally, an old shaman named Greyvolf. He had been guarding the secrets of the Heart of the Earth for decades, waiting for the right moment to pass on his knowledge. Greyvolf saw in Silas the potential to restore balance to the land, to free it from the corrupting influence of the European vampires. "The Heart of the Earth is not just a weapon," Greyvolf explained. "It is a conduit of life, a force that connects all living things. If you can master its power, you can reshape the world." With Greyvolf's guidance, Silas and Lydia found the cave. The entrance was hidden behind a waterfall, its shimmering veil masking the sacred space within. As they stepped inside, they felt the pulse of the earth, a rhythmic beat that resonated with their very souls. But they were not alone. Thorn and a cadre of European vampires had tracked them, determined to seize the artifact. A tense standoff ensued, the air thick with anticipation. Thorn, sensing the power emanating from Silas, spoke with a mixture of respect and determination. "You have become something extraordinary, Silas," Thorn said. "But this power cannot belong to you alone. It must be shared, controlled." Silas's eyes burned with defiance. "This power will not be used to oppress and exploit. It will be used to destroy those who seek to control others." A fierce battle erupted in the sacred cave. Silas's strength and agility were unmatched, but Thorn wielded ancient magic that tested even his newfound abilities. Lydia's sharpshooting skills kept the other vampires at bay, her bullets finding their marks with deadly precision. Amid the chaos, Silas reached the Heart of the Earth. The artifact was a crystalline structure, glowing with an inner light. As he touched it, he felt a surge of energy course through him, amplifying his powers and connecting him to the very soul of the land. With this newfound strength, Silas turned the tide of the battle, driving back Thorn and his followers. Realizing that they were outmatched, Thorn called for a retreat. The European vampires fled, their plans in disarray. Silas and Lydia stood victorious, the Heart of the Earth now under their protection. But the victory came with a price. Silas understood that possessing such power made him a target, not just for the European vampires, but for any who sought to control the land's magic. He knew that the struggle was far from over, and that his quest for revenge and justice had only just begun. Silas Black, the invulnerable American vampire, now wielded a power beyond imagination. With Lydia and Grey Wolf by his side, he prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The final reckoning was still to come, and the future of both the human and vampire worlds hung in the balance. As Silas gazed into the glowing depths of the heart of the earth, he felt a strange sense of destiny. The power was his to command, but it also carried a heavy responsibility. The path forward was uncertain, but one thing was clear: Silas Black would stop at nothing to achieve his goals, and the world would never be the same again. The chill of winter gave way to an uneasy spring as Silas Black, Lydia Caldwell, and Grey Wolf stood on the precipice of destiny. With the heart of the earth under his control, Silas felt a connection to the land that he had never imagined. The power coursing through him was both a blessing and a burden, and he knew that his fight was far from over. The European vampires, now led by the cunning Elias Thorne, regrouped and strategized. Their defeat in the sacred cave had humbled them, but it had also made them more determined. Thorne, with his knowledge of ancient magic and deep understanding of the land's mystical forces, concocted a plan to reclaim their dominance and rid the world of Silas Black once and for all. Thorne's plan hinged on a risky gamble: to corrupt the heart of the earth. If they could taint its power, they could weaken Silas and turn his newfound strength against him. To do this, they needed to perform a dark ritual, one that required the blood of an innocent and the sacrifice of a powerful vampire. Under the cover of night, Thorne and his followers kidnapped Lydia. Silas, upon discovering her absence, felt a rage unlike any he had ever known. He could feel her fear through their bond, a painful reminder of his own vulnerabilities. With Grey Wolf's guidance, Silas tracked them to an ancient, forgotten temple deep in the mountains. The temple was a place of dark power, its walls etched with runes of blood and suffering. As Silas and Grey Wolf approached, they could hear the chanting of the European vampires, the air thick with the scent of death and decay. The ritual had already begun. Thorne stood at the altar, Lydia bound and helpless before him. He held a ceremonial dagger, its blade shimmering with a malevolent light. Silas burst into the temple, his eyes blazing with fury. "Release her, Thorne." Silas's voice echoed through the chamber, a mix of anger and desperation. Thorne smiled coldly. "You're too late, Silas. The ritual is nearly complete. Once the heart of the earth is corrupted, you will be powerless." Silas lunged at Thorne, but the European vampires intercepted him. A fierce battle ensued, the air crackling with dark magic and the clash of supernatural strength. Grey Wolf fought valiantly by Silas's side, his knowledge of ancient spells providing a crucial edge. But the odds were against them. Thorne's followers were numerous and well-prepared. As Silas struggled to reach Lydia, Thorne raised the dagger and plunged it into her heart. Lydia's scream pierced the air, a sound of pure agony that cut through Silas's soul. The blood from her wound flowed into the ritual circle, mingling with the dark energy that swirled around the temple. A surge of power erupted from the altar, knocking Silas back. He watched in horror as the heart of the earth, now tainted by the ritual, pulsed with a sickly, corrupted light. Silas felt his strength draining, his connection to the land twisted and poisoned. Thorne's laughter echoed through the temple. "You see, Silas, your power is now mine to command." Desperation fueled Silas's final assault. He fought with every ounce of strength he had left, but it was not enough. Thorne, now augmented by the corrupted heart, was too powerful. With a final, devastating blow, Thorne sent Silas crashing to the ground. As Silas lay there, weakened and defeated, he saw the lifeless body of Lydia, her eyes staring into the void. The realization of his failure hit him harder than any physical blow. He had not only lost the battle, but also the person he had come to care for the most. Thorne stood over him, a victorious gleam in his eyes. "This land will once again be ours, and you will be remembered as a footnote in history, a failed experiment." With a final, cruel twist, Thorne drove the corrupted energy of the heart into Silas, severing his connection to the land and leaving him powerless. The once invincible vampire lay broken and defeated, his body and spirit shattered. The European vampires reclaimed their dominance, their control now unchallenged. The land itself seemed to wither under their influence, its ancient magic tainted by their corruption. Grey Wolf, the last witness to the tragedy, fled into the wilderness, carrying with him the burden of their failure. Silas Black's legend faded into obscurity, a cautionary tale whispered among the shadows. The American frontier, once a land of hope and promise, succumbed to the darkness of its new rulers. And in the depths of the corrupted temple, the heart of the earth pulsed with a malevolent glow, a grim reminder of the cost of defiance. The world had changed, and it was not for the better. The reign of the European vampires was secure, and the hope of a new era died with Silas Black. The final reckoning had come, and the forces of darkness had prevailed.